Guess what, Kyle?
It's Christmas.
No, it's time for our first giant size special. So this is the We Don't Know What to Watch giant size special number 1.
Or in this case, we do know what to watch.
So these are we call them giant size specials, which is an old comic book term. And these are going to be where we're talking about movies where we get to pick what we watch, as opposed to our usual thing, which is where we use the magic algorithm to pick a random movie based on a few parameters. So this one, what do we watch?
We watched the...
Oh, and by the way, this is the Tetsuo to my Canada, Kyle Mulford, and I'm Noah Saturn.
I am Tetsuo.
Canada!
Oh, Canada. We watched Akira. Or Akira? Or I don't know.
I'll call it Akira because I'm a dumb American.
Yes, I think we'll just go with Akira.
Neo Tokyo is about to explode.
This is one that I've always wanted to watch, and this is the first time I've ever watched it was this week. And I watched it twice. I watched once the original Japanese dub, and then just to take in all of the fantastic visuals, I watched it again with the English dub so that I could still hear what's going on, but then just take in everything. So
it is a very plot-dense movie, so...
It is quite dense.
There's a lot going on. And also, dubs versus subs, whatever you choose to do is great. Generally, when I'm taking notes for something like this, I tend just to have a dub. So that way it's, you're looking, otherwise you're reading like subtitles on the screen, then you have to write down notes and it can get lost easier. But that's just a personal thing. So dubs, subs, whatever, you do you.
And a lot of times I don't like to do dubs it works for notes and everything, and also like I said with this one, there's a lot of stuff going on visually, so it helped to watch it one time with the dub. I don't generally like to, because a lot of times when they do an English dub, they just don't get the inflections right. There's a lot of stuff they don't get right with like the voice acting. For some reason, there's a lot of good English voice actors, and yet sometimes these Japanese anime and stuff, they don't get dubbed very well. But I will say, I think that I saw that there's actually 2 different dubs of this, English dubs. I don't know which one I watched, but it was actually done pretty well. And that English dub that I watched was on Tubi TV, so you can watch this for free online.
Mm-hmm.
So what's first here? We going to talk about the movie itself first?
Sure. It came out in 1988. It's about 2 hours, 4 minutes long, at least according to my count, on the Blu-ray. And this is sort of one of the... I guess a lot of people qualify this film as cyberpunk. And this came out in the 80s, so this was kind of post-Blade Runner. Blade Runner was 82, this was 88. Post-Neuromancer, which is kind of pointed to be like one of the first big cyberpunk works of fiction. And one of the things that makes this movie unique is that, it's based off of a manga by Katsuhiro Otomo, and he also directed the film, so that's pretty rare that the same person does both, and it turns out super well. I mean,
Yeah, and he actually didn't want to do the movie unless he was the director. So apparently he had some experience on must have been another adaptation, and decided that unless he was going to direct this, he didn't want to do it. So they actually formed the Akira Committee, which is 5 or 6 companies that came together for the production of this movie. It was Kondansha, I'm going to butcher these names, Mainichi Broadcasting System, Bandai, Hakuhodo, Toho, and Laserdisc. And I don't think the manga was actually... He finished writing the manga in 1990.
Yeah, so it was serialized from, I want to say 1982. I could be wrong there. So early 80s to through almost the entire 80s. So he worked on this for a long time. So it is kind of unique in that sense that, the movie was released before he had finished the work. So it's almost like, I think the closest equivalent that I would think would be something like, Scott Pilgrim versus the World, where the movie came out before the comics were finished.
Oh, I wasn't aware that was the case on that one either. Which I just rewatched Scott Pilgrim not too long ago, and it's great. So the fact that he hadn't finished the manga, he reverse engineered the movie, as in he made an ending that would tie up most of the main characters for the movie And from that, he was able to figure out what to take out of his 2,000-page manga series. So, because obviously, even though he wasn't finished, it was such an immense amount of material that he had to take some stuff out. So, by making the ending first, he was able to figure out which storylines out of the manga to take out of there to make the film. And I don't know, like, what's your experience with this movie? Like I said, this is the first time I watched it.
It's one of those things that's kind of been, the name has just kind of been floated around like, oh, like, say when you're first getting into anime or whatever, when you're past sort of like the quote-unquote, like your Dragon Ball Zs and your Narutos, it's one of those things that's always at the top of like one of like either the top 10 or like the top 5 or like one of the best anime movies ever. And it's kind of fun to see, imagine watching this for like the first time when you have no idea, like especially when you're contrasting with stuff that was coming out at the time, there's this and then there's Disney.
Yeah, and this is a far cry from Disney. This is one that it came out in 88 in Japan, and then it came out in December 25th, so Christmas of 1989 in the US, and I think it was a very limited run in the US, and then the following years they started like producing VHS, not DVD yet, in like the early 90s, and that was about the time that I was hearing about it as a kid, and so early 90s, I'm going to be like 12, 13 years old. And I had heard about this movie and people were talking about, like, oh, this awesome anime movie. And it's like, oh, what's anime? Because this is actually kind of something that kicked off an interest in the US in anime. And now my 12 or 13-year-old self is kicking me for not seeking it out when I heard about it because it was a fantastic movie.
Yeah, it's pretty wild.
And it's something that I would have loved when I was that age. So
I first watched it when I was like, 17 or 18. Because when I was in high school, like a bunch of my friends were really into anime. And I was like, because I wasn't really allowed to watch it. Because this was back in like the 2000s when Toonami was sort of a really big thing. And all my friends would watch Naruto and like Dragon Ball Z when they were both kind of at their peak popularity airing on Cartoon Network. And my parents never allowed me to watch it because I grew up a very sheltered child and I grew up in a box. So those never really connected with me, but I was interested. And then I'd never even really seen like that many Miyazaki movies. So like Studio Ghibli was also kind of foreign to me. So I kind of picked this one up just like, you're out Googling stuff around. Like, oh, hey, they have this at the library or whatever. I'll get it and I watch it there. Then you're like, what is going on?
This is not like any animated movies I ever watched.
This isn't like My Neighbor Spirited
Totoro.
Away or whatever.
My Neighbor Totoro. This movie had a budget of 1.1 billion yen, which equated to about $9 million. And a couple interesting things about this is anime generally would have animation where they kind of cheated and cut corners and just animated the mouth moving. And this was one of the first movies to actually like have movement through the whole thing. Like the bodies are moving, it's a fully animated movie. And it actually is the first anime to have pre-recorded dialogue. So they recorded the dialogue before they animated the movie and they animated around the dialogue. And this is considered to be one of the greatest animated and one of the greatest sci-fi movies of all time. So on a lot of lists, it's on a lot of lists of like top 50, top 100.
Mm-hmm.
And rightfully so, because now it's, 31 years later?
Something like that.
Well, actually, it is 31 years later because you get that on the title screen, which I found it interesting. This is the first time I ever watched this movie. And when you're watching, it opens up with like a giant explosion, not an explosion, but like this kind of event that just takes out Tokyo. And then it cuts to 31 years later in Neo Tokyo in 2019. So I'm watching the future Neo Tokyo in the present day. So I found that interesting that this was the year I decided to finally watch this movie. And this one has another fun fact. It was the first animated film to be released on the Criterion Collection on a 1992 Laserdisc. Remember what those are, kids?
I've never really seen a Laserdisc in person, but
I just think of a DVD the size of a record.
Yeah, it's pretty much what they are, but...
And it was the only animation released by Criterion until 2014 when they released Fantastic Mr. Fox, which is more stop motion, so it's still like the only true animation movie, I guess.
Well, since then they've released Fantastic Planet.
Oh, okay.
And
you know what?
Watership Down.
I've watched the Fantastic Planet Criterion disc.
Yeah, some good stuff.
Yeah. So should we get into the movie itself?
So let's kind of start with the broad strokes. This is sort of, it's the future, cyberpunk, the future year of 2019, and the city of Neo-Tokyo is not doing so hot. There's riots, there's paramilitary operatives, there's, government, the city's kind of falling apart. Street gangs are everywhere. It almost reminds me a little bit of Batman Beyond.
Yeah.
I could kind of see that, I'm sure. But then again, this is one of those films where, it's people who have seen it, its influence is everywhere.
Yes, this is another one of those movies where, hey, you remember this? Well, it was influenced by this.
I do, especially the Wachowskis are big anime fans, so it influenced stuff like The Matrix and a lot of their work, so...
Yeah, considering, Ghost in the Shell we talked about on a previous episode, that was basically their pitch was... Hey, look at Ghost in the Shell. We want to do that, but live action. So yeah, they are obviously anime fans. Well, because they even did the Speed Racer movie too.
Which is, yeah.
I don't know. Is that anime? What is that?
Speed
I used to watch that and I don't know what it is.
It's interesting. It's very one of the earlier imports. It's like Speed Racer, Astro Boy, and Hilda were the first 3 big ones that were imported to the U.S. from Japan. There's an interesting 2-part YouTube video, just the history of anime by a channel that does a show called Down the Rabbit Hole. I'd recommend that. They're really good at sort of being concise and very well researched stuff. And if you want to learn more about just Akira, there's a great ongoing series where 3 cartoonists sort of look at Akira as a manga, and they go through volume by volume because there's these 6 massive volumes that cover the whole Akira as a manga.
And I wanted to try and read some of it before watching the movie and before recording, but I reserved it at the library, and I reserved all 6 volumes. And there were 3 people ahead of me with these, and somehow Volume 3 came in last week. Or no, Volume 2 came in last week, and now today Volume 6 came in, but Volume 1 is still out there, so I don't know who's getting done with these out of order. So I never even got Volume 1, so I didn't even start it yet. But I will be reading it soon.
It's a lot of fun. I definitely recommend it if you're just a fan of manga or just comics in general, because it's extremely well written, extremely well drawn. It's very visual. There's a lot of sort of just kind of silent panels where it's just movement or sound effects.
So in the movie, we've got a few groups of people. We've got the main group that we're following is Kaneda. And his
street gang.
He's kind of a bike gang, which actually is kind of influences the iconic poster that has the big title of Akira on there. And then him walking, it's Kaneda walking towards his red bike.
His red bike with his red jacket that has a pill on the back that says good for health, bad for education.
What? I didn't actually pay attention to what it actually said on there.
There's a friend of mine who actually found a red jacket that looked kind of similar to it from Goodwill or something. That he found someone who made that patch on Etsy, and he put it on.
Oh, nice!
Put it on the back of his jacket. It was pretty great.
So he's got a biker gang because he's cool like that.
And this is a product of the 80s, remember, because in Japan in the 80s there were actual biker gangs. So a lot of this he's kind of pulling straight from where he was living in Tokyo at the time.
And Tetsuo is kind of his
second fiddle. So he's the kid brother of the group.
Yeah, because there's 2 or 3 others. I can't remember all their names. They kind of come in and out of the story. But the main 2 are going to be Kaneda and Tetsuo.
It's kind of the main thread is the relationship between Kaneda and Tetsuo.
Yeah, and their relationship together is what kind of guides how Tetsuo reacts to things throughout the film. So, I mean, things could have turned out completely differently if their relationship was a little different.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's a resistance movement with Ki and Ryu.
Kei and Ryu.
I'm going to butcher all the names.
Mm-hmm. And then they're fighting against M. Bison and the rest of the
Yes.
Street Fighter gang.
Raul Julia.
Raul Julia would have made this film so much better. But for me, it was Tuesday.
But Jean-Claude Van Damme would have dropped it a little, I think.
Yeah, fair enough.
But they're fighting.
I still need to see Street Fighter the movie.
I've seen it, but it was a long time ago, and it was not very good.
Yeah, I think it's net, but now it's gotten to the point where it's so bad it's good. I feel like it could be one of those movies where like you quote along with it, almost like
it was 1994, so it was still in the period where I was watching every single Van Damme movie that came out.
Nice,
because I started in the 80s and watched them all until about 99 when you got to like the movie Knockoff. And that's about what I saw that in the theater, and that's about where I started dwindling. I was like, okay, these are just kind of becoming knockoffs of their own. But somehow we digress to JCVD. Naksukau. But so they're fighting against this military guy, the Colonel something or other. Colonel.
I could just call him the Colonel.
Shikishima. The Colonel and his scientist friend who are researching this
psychic powers.
Yeah, basically psychic powers. They
telekinesis.
Have these kids that have this ability that they're tapped into, and they think that everyone has this innate ability to tap into this, but some are stronger than others. You know,
there's different power levels, different things, and it's kind of playing on the whole psychic kids, almost riffing on MK Ultra, and all the kids have different numbers. So like say one of them could be numbered like, I don't know, 11 or something. Then there's like 26, 28.
Yeah, and 28 is Akira himself.
Well, what's interesting about this movie, we don't really find out who or what Akira is until like an hour into it. So whenever someone says Akira, it's always like with this very ominous tone. So the whole thing is named Akira because Akira is a very common Japanese name. So the American equivalent would be like naming your movie Steve.
Or John.
Or something like. So then everyone's like, but what about John? Yeah, they talked about John.
What about Cornelius?
So 30 years ago, this explosion destroyed Tokyo. And no one really knows what caused it, but we know it has something to do with Akira, and sort of these street groups have decided that Akira is kind of their god. And they think Akira's awakening soon, and there's like almost like these doomsday cults focused on him.
Yeah, and he was one of the experimental kids. And for the longest time in the movie, you think that he's like locked up somewhere.
He's locked in somewhere.
Under a stadium.
Under the Olympic Stadium for the 2020 Olympics.
They're going to bomb the stadium with an Akira bomb. But then there's 3 other kids, so we don't know. It's like 25 and 26 and whatever, but like they never really explain where's 1 through 22 or whatever.
It doesn't tell you how long this program has been going on, and some of it is just kind of left for you to infer. That's one of the things I like. But let's back up here and go back to the beginning of the film, where it starts out, it's just, kids hanging out in a bar, trying to get some drugs. They say no to drugs, so then, all right, fine. The clown gang, which is another one of the biker gangs, clown gangs are going this way. Let's go beat them up. So it's a group of our Kaneda, Tetsuo, and our group of merry men going on to motorcycle. And this is probably one of the more memorable scenes of the entire film, which is this really cool motorcycle fight. You can feel the motion. Everything feels fast, and this is a movie that the entire film was animated in 24 frames per second. So even Disney at the time would do mostly 12 frames per second, and sometimes other anime series do like 6 frames per second just because it's easier, it's cheaper, because 24 frames per second,
that's a lot of animation.
That's twice as many drawings you have to do to get a single motion per second.
That's a lot of hand cramps.
That's a lot of hand cramps. You just got to stretch, take breaks.
And I think I saw there was some computer images in here, but not much.
Not much, very little.
Yeah. There's a couple of like where the scientist is looking at his little computer that's got a 3D modeling thing of the power structure of Akira and others, and you can tell that's kind of computer generated, but everything else is animated and it looks fantastic. That's why I watched it the second time with the English dub, because I didn't want to be distracted with the subtitles because there's so much to look at in this movie.
Mm-hmm. And this is another thing that I like about this film is that it very much makes Neo Tokyo a character. Because you see, like, this is a city that's kind of falling apart at its own from the inside. The buildings don't look great. The infrastructure is crumbling. There's attacks from these revolutionaries and bombs going off and military police going everywhere. There's riots. There's traffic jams, graffiti all over the place.
It's a mess.
Like, if you ever look at, like, Google pictures of New York in the 1970s, it's pretty surreal, very different from the New York we know today, but it kind of reminds me of that.
It's Metropolis after Superman's fight with Zod. I'm just trying to bait people who hate that movie.
Oh, boy.
I got to mention a comic book movie. It's
fair enough.
Our giant size special, even though this is a comic.
Mm-hmm.
It's
not a comic, it's a manga.
It's a manga. God, get right. What kind of nerd are you?
They're the same thing.
It's just a backwards comic. So like you said, it really does feel like a character, and there's so much detail in everything around there with all of the crumbling infrastructure and everything, and the locations and the lab and where the kids are, the ghost kids, which that's the later we find out that the kids who were being experimented on with psychic, they were giving them drugs and stuff, and somehow like their powers evolved into also being able to manifest other places, and
like they can teleport, they can kind of do telepathy, control other people's through their minds, mind control.
So we've got the biker gang. They're fighting the clowns and the insane clown posse, and the bike sequences are great. And I liked the little touch of the taillights. They would animate like a streak behind the bikes to make it look like, the speed and everything. And this is where you get into, so this is how violent this movie's going to get. Because, boy, do they bash these
There's blood, there's guts, a guy falls off a motorbike, then his arm is run over.
And later you find out that they only put everyone in the hospital. I'm going, some of these, that person's dead for sure. But no, there is death in this movie too. And boy, is there death.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to go to where the bike chases the clowns, and then man and the ghost kid during the riots. So there's a guy who grabbed part of the resistance who grabbed one of the ghost kids out of the lab because he wants to expose them for what they're doing.
Takashi, I believe.
Yes. And he gets caught in the middle of a riot and doesn't have anywhere to go. And then the cops see that he's bleeding.
Giant spotlight comes up. He's been shot.
Yeah.
And then sort of another iconic moment, I think might have even been in one of the trailers, was that it kind of shows like, all right, kid, come on, go get out of here. So it kind of shows them get kind of just like shot up a bunch by machine guns, almost in like a RoboCop sort of way.
Oh yeah, it was just point blank there with like 10 cops shooting him, just blood spurting everywhere off the body, just flying in the air. And yeah, it's very, very violent and aggressive. And then the kid screams because the kids don't like blood.
Because, he's a little kid.
Yeah, he's a little kid. Although it's weird because also these powers must like drain them or something. Because I think it's that of the age.
They're a small child, but they're look like they're aged in like their 60s or 70s.
Yeah, so they look like
gray
old
skin
people in a small body. the gray skin, white hair, and he screams, and with the psychic powers, like you got glass shattering everywhere on the buildings and falling on people, and then he just vanishes. And then the cycle chase goes and continues, and the riots, and Tetsuo runs into the ghost kid eventually.
He sees a kid on the highway, tries to avoid him on his bike, and then he gets hurt.
And the reason is there's a relationship between Tetsuo and Canada. I just want to keep saying Canada. That Canada is kind of the leader of the group, and he kind of adopted Tetsuo in as a child. You learn later through like this memory sequence. Mm-hmm. And he kind of treats him like a child, and he's always rescuing him and always helping him out. And Tetsuo is kind of resentful of this. So he wants to be his own person. He wants to prove himself. And so when he hits this kid, they learn that he has this innate ability also, and so the scientists grab him too.
Like something activates him, when Tetsuo's on the ground, they're like, kid, what'd you do to me? After he, wrecks his bike, trying to avoid this kid. Then all of a sudden, the cops show up, military helicopter.
And they say they're taking him to a hospital. All the kids are, the kids are all arrested.
It's like, what'd you guys do? Did you have something to do with the clown gang? We're just innocent bystanders.
We're going to visit my grandma. She's sick.
Shows the next day, they're in, the police station trying to figure out what's going on.
Yeah, and then some Looney Tune with a grenade pulls it, and it's a dud, but then they're like, oh, we'll get them, and then let these kids go. They're just a street gang. Whatever. Let's deal with the real people involved here.
And then when you leave, it looks like this police station is actually set up in some sort of old gymnasium from a high school or something.
Yeah, who knows what, maybe the police station got sucked up in the explosion of the...
It's been bombed recently from the revolutionaries or whatever.
Yeah, because, they didn't do a good job of rebuilding the city after.
Yeah, it's been rebuilt, but then now it's starting to fall apart again.
It was 31 years, and they just did not maintain it. The janitors all died in the explosion.
I guess so.
And so they get out of there, and then you see some testing on Tetsuo.
And this is the moment before when they're leaving it there. That's when Kaneda meets Kei, who we know from earlier in the film was trying to find Takashi, the ghost kid. So, she's part of the revolution, but then she somehow got roped in with them too. So then he gets her to he helps her leave the police station, hey, and then, of course, he starts putting the moves on there because he's just a dumb kid.
She's like, you're just a skirt chaser. You'll do anything for a girl.
It's like, well, I would, could I appreciate your intelligence and your prettiness? You have to be really good for me to do something for you.
So, he helps her out, and then she just takes off on him. While they're testing Tetsuo in the lab, they're talking about him having potentially the power of Akira.
We've noticed he could have the power levels. You mean of Akira? And, what is Akira? Who is Akira? We don't know. And I don't think the scientists really even know.
No. Who does know?
I think someone
had
colonel,
to have known. Because,
or with the higher up above the colonel, which is in the high council.
Yeah, because you figure out later where, what happened to him, and someone had to have done that, which means someone knows.
But this is top secret.
Yeah. So they say that, they're going to try and control it, but if they can't control it, they need to terminate him. They'll bring in Arnold Schwarzenegger.
I guess so.
The kids go to this cruddy school. They get slapped for being disobedient.
What was really funny is this drill sergeant type gym teacher. It's discipline, whap, discipline, whap, discipline, whap. Slaps all of them.
They all walk out of there with black eyes.
With the bruises on their cheeks, yeah.
And all their girlfriends meet them, and Tetsuo's girlfriend, Kaori, comes out and... where's Tetsuo? He's at a hospital. I don't know where.
I don't know where. He's taken by the government.
He's a loser. Get caught.
And, they go to this, vocational school, which kind of looks like it's sort of very much kind of the last stop after your juvenile delinquency sort of thing.
You didn't make it in this school and this school. Now just go to this one. It doesn't
If you don't
matter.
make it here, then you're going straight to prison or whatever.
You all suck. And Tetsuo escapes it. Then we cut back to Tetsuo, who escapes his room, which... was this the time that that later he went on a rampage. This one he just escaped and ran off and found his girlfriend and said, let's run away together. Let's steal Kaneda's bike and run away together.
Yeah, so this is sort of this, I guess the big prop of the film that comes back again and again is kind of this red motorcycle, which I think he stole. It's from someone.
Yeah. And the funny thing is it's on the poster and it comes back and again, and there's really no real significance to it, honestly.
It's cool.
It's just, other than it's a really cool motorcycle. And
even the characters think it's cool. It's just,
yeah.
This is kind of become iconic and representative of the film is this red bike.
Yeah, and Tetsuo was trying to take it earlier and Kaneda's like, I rigged this for myself. No one else can ride this thing. And, well, this time Tetsuo steals it and we find out, no, he can't ride it because it breaks down in the road and he gets attacked by the clowns again.
Hey, you guys put some of our guys in the hospital attacked, trying trying to take care of himself. And then at the same time, the rest of the gang, they leave school and they're like, oh crap, we gotta go find Tetsuo. He took my bike.
This bastard. He's a friend, but like they just kind of treat him like just a tag along.
And he's constantly trying to prove himself. That's kind of his whole theme throughout the film. Is like, I gotta prove myself, legitimize myself, that I'm better than everybody else.
And that's what got him in the trouble in the first place, is when he ran into the kid earlier, it's because everyone got hit with this explosion and they kind of stopped, and Tetsuo went after the gang himself, and he was trying to be cocky and say, I can do this on my own, and then he's not paying attention and runs into this kid. So he didn't prove himself very well.
He did not.
He gets into a fight with the clowns again, and then the scientist tracks him and takes him back to the lab again.
Yep, because he starts having like these massive headaches that he doesn't understand.
Yeah, and he's
almost like
having
he starts
hallucinations.
Starts
seeing things.
And this is after, of course, he almost beat a clown member to death because he's still angry and trying to prove himself after he and his girlfriend got hurt.
Oh, man, he's got anger issues. That's right.
So he goes back to what's probably a more of a military hospital now.
Yeah, and so he's taken back again, and then Kaneda and his friends don't know what happened to him again, and they go and they're wandering around through the riots, and then he sees Kei again and follows her to the Resistance hideout.
Mm-hmm, because he's just a dumb kid. And that's what I kind of like how Kaneda does this whole thing. Like, he goes through this big journey, but then half the time it's really just because he's just in the wrong place at the wrong time and ends up taking a bigger role in this just because he happens to know Tetsuo.
Yeah, and then he ends up with the Resistance just because he's chasing after this girl that he thinks is hot.
Yeah.
So, pretty girl.
It's like, we can't get rid of him, and we want to kill him. It's like, oh, don't kill me. I know this guy.
He's my friend. So they take him, and they're gonna include him on the plan to break out Tetsuo. Little do they know that Tetsuo is like developing his powers now, and he breaks himself out again. After a really cool sequence with like the toys in his room.
Sort of the toys in his room starting to like come to life, and he's like, "What? What's going on?" And then they become sort of like these huge toys, and they try and attack him and talk to him, and he gets really scared and confused because you realize it's sort of these psychic kids sort of interpreting their powers in the world how they see it, and they think of these toys because they've been stuck in this sort of nursery for a long time.
But again, it comes back to the blood thing because he didn't know what was going on until he stepped on a glass and cut his foot and just... He pulled the piece out, just blood squirts out of his foot, and the kid goes, "Oh, it's blood! I don't like blood!" And he's like, "Oh, it's the ghost kids again doing this." So these kids, all you have to do is show them blood, and they'll stop, and they'll stop attacking you. So that's the lesson. If you run into a ghost kid, just cut your finger and show him the blood.
I guess so.
And so he escapes, and this was a cool scene too, where he like comes into his power, and he gets out of his room, and these 3 orderlies come up and they're like, "What are you doing? You're supposed to stay in your room, blah, blah, blah." And he just goes, "Mind, kill them." And they just explode in the hallway, just blood everywhere.
Yeah, it goes full Scanners.
Well, he goes further than Scanners. It's the whole body. They're just blood and guts on the walls and the ceiling. It's a pretty cool, it's pretty violent, but pretty cool
It's very sudden, almost takes you offhand I've seen this movie more than once, and still every time he goes, whoa.
Yeah, it's just like, where'd they go? Oh, they're all over the place.
They're here, they're here, they're here, they're here.
Here.
Exactly.
He exited, here. So he escapes and murders people. That was my note. And Ryu and the gang break in through the sewers, and there's a cool sewer chase scene through there with these like cool hover bike things
with guns on the end.
It's almost kind of like the speeder bikes from Return of the Jedi.
A little bit.
And they're flying through the sewers, and actually Kaneda kind of proves himself to the Resistance gang in here because he was pretty badass in there.
He jumps on a speeder bike, punches a guy off, takes it, and starts to learn how to control it.
Well, then at one point, he like takes the gun on the front of one and just like shoots around in a circle and knocks off another guy. And then he learns how to ride it and takes Key and rides to the level they need to go to.
Kind of. Because then another plot point that shows up here is that, it's like, where do we go? How do we find Tetsuo? And then Kay starts speaking in this very calm voice. And then through sound, you can tell that like sort of they double it with the voice of Kyoko, another one of the ghost kids.
Yeah, and she's kind of saying, so Kay is on the back of the bike going, "Go to the toy room.
Go to this level."
And like,
There's
you're
a freight
creeping me out.
element in
You're
this
creeping
one.
me out with that voice, man. Go find the ghost kids. Are they the ghost kids of Ghost Dad?
Certainly hope not.
So they find Tetsuo and
Well, Tetsuo finds them as he's like, I gotta find out what's happening to me.
yeah, and then
He gets angrier, his headaches are starting to get worse, his powers are increasing.
and he kills someone else again before going to. He finds out mentally where, like psychically, where Akira is because the girl ghost knows, and she didn't say anything, but he read her mind or something.
Mm-hmm.
So he's going to the stadium.
But there's this cool fight where Kaneda and Tetsuo's like, Tetsuo, I'm here to help. We're going to take you back. He's like, don't you get it? I'm stronger than you now. That sort of thing. And he starts showing off some of his mental powers, and he has a confrontation with the Colonel.
And then the Colonel's fired.
Kind of.
Because he had a thing with the council where they've been funding the research of these kids.
It's like, what are you doing with your little pet projects? And he's kind of very much sort of this, we got to have our strong defense, and then...
Yeah, and so like funding has been cut in all these other locations or all these other areas of the government, and that's why the city's kind of getting run down because they've been funneling all this money into experimenting on these psychics, and after 31 years, it's like they haven't really gotten anywhere. So they end up firing the colonel for, basically not doing his job of protecting anything because they haven't learned anything from this. So he gets fired, but then he fights back and he grabs his army and says, "Screw you guys! I'm still running this thing." Mm-hmm. And then Tetsuo has a fight with Ki with the ghost powers because she gets like possessed by the ghost kids and has a fight with him.
And then we see him go down under the Olympic Stadium, and we find what Akira is labeled. We see this sort of big circular thing on a map, and it says 28 in the middle because that's Akira's number. And then we see sort of Akira's kind of kept at like almost like these sub-zero, as cold as possible temperatures, just to make sure he can never wake up. And this giant tank thing, and then Tetsuo's powers start getting even bigger, so he kind of takes it and lifts it up to the surface level as he rides it up. It's just incredible to watch.
Yeah, and then you find out the funny thing is that they're keeping him frozen so he doesn't rise up again, but he's in like a bunch of jars, like different body parts.
You find out that after the Akira explosion 31 years ago, he was just pretty much vivisected to see what worked. And
to see why he blew up the city, or like how it happened.
And all that's left are just like bits and pieces, like optic nerves, central nerves.
Because the scientists believe that like the power that they're harnessing is the same power that created the universe to begin with. So when we get to that point, he finds that Akira's just in body parts in jars, so it's kind of like the heads in Futurama. And I figure it's just like...
And also at this point, he's kind of gone on full rampage mode, destroying people, blowing up tanks. He's got this red cape thing going on.
Yeah, he found some cloth or something somewhere, ripped it off, and made himself a cape.
Kind of gone into full supervillain mode at this point.
Yeah. And again, that's because this is where I think that the character development is great in this, because you understand why he went full villain instead of looking for help or becoming a hero with, or like trying to help people with these powers or anything, is because he's had to be rescued so often and just treated like he can't do anything for so long that he decided, screw you all, you treat me like a baby, I'm gonna fucking kill you all.
Pretty much.
All y'all are gonna go down.
And then Kenneth's like, oh crap, things aren't going very well. I gotta figure something out. And he tries to go, he gets on his red bike, we see that again. He's got this sort of laser gun. It's like, alright, I found this cool super laser weapon.
He shoots Tetsuo in the chest, and he just kind of looks down at it.
Yeah, he tries to shoot him, and then, oh no, the laser weapon runs out of battery.
What the crap? I got a hole in my chest. And then the Colonel says, bring out Soul. And
Colonel's gone like, alright, this guy's got it bad. We gotta take him out. So he uses Soul, which is basically a space laser.
A giant satellite in space and just shoots a laser straight down on Tetsuo. And the funny thing is like the laser covered his whole body and somehow it just cut off his arm.
Yeah, all that's left is he just loses one arm. He's like, ah! Then he freaks out, gets angry, flies up to space, and pretty much destroys Seoul.
So all of a sudden, he's flying into space. And
so the city's being destroyed. Everything's going crazy.
He's fighting giant space lasers. Cats and dogs living together.
Mass hysteria.
Mass hysteria. The satellite falls to Earth, and so that causes more destruction with debris. And then Tetsuo makes a new arm for himself. Like, he uses his powers to, like, just gather up, like, metal parts and stuff and create an arm. And he decides he needs drugs, so he attacks the Colonel with his mutant arm. And then,
well, you're jumping ahead there, Buckaroo. There's still...
Was that...
So then there's this quiet scene. There's this quiet moment where you're like, okay, Tetsuo is pretty much taken over, and then things are falling apart. Everyone's trying to leave. We find out that the head of the revolution was also a member of the council. He's trying to get out of there. He dies. And then we find out the thing keeping Tetsuo sane was the drugs they were giving him. Now he's not doing so hot. But then Canada is going around trying to sort of recharge the laser battery because he knows things are only going to get worse. And pretty much society is kind of falling apart. People are fending for themselves, looting everywhere. And then Tetsuo is all by himself in the Olympic Stadium, kind of this weird makeshift throne.
Yeah, that's kind of weird because it gives them time to for Canada to charge the batteries. So like there's this little comedic interlude there where they're around a campfire and he's charging the batteries with one of his friend's motorcycles, and then it catches on fire. So and
why don't you use your motorbike?
It's just a motorcycle. Why don't you use yours then? No. Mine's not just a bike. It's an iconic bike.
Yeah.
It's an iconic bike. So yeah, then Tetsuo's like he's just sitting on his throne or whatever and just chilling and until everyone comes back to try and fight him again.
So Kaori goes back and she's trying to help him, like, what's going on? You realize, Tetsuo's not doing so hot.
And he's lost control of his powers.
And his power, like, I know he's got his metal arm on the throne and all the circuitry just kind of starts going into the chair at first. And then the Colonel's kind of on his own. He's lost everything. He's like, all right, I'm going to go try and kill him. But then the scientists are still trying to... The science guy, he doesn't really care about people as much as in the human cost. He just wants to see, all right, we got to see how this power goes. It looks really cool.
And the power turns him into a giant blob man.
So basically, as he's losing it, his power is kind of overtaking his body and sort of just expanding, is not doing what he wants, and is just
mutating.
Kind of gets into the real body horror, almost like The Fly or something.
And it's another cool sequence just because of the animation of the hands and body parts kind of like mutating off of him and like overlapping
very globular
each other.
And blobbing, and he turns into like this giant baby because he's losing all of his powers, and that's kind of what he feels like. And then, Canada's trying to go on, and things are just getting worse and worse and worse. And then the three kids are like, there's really only one thing we can do, and let's try and kind of wake up and remake Akira.
Yeah. And they succeed at that at one point, because then there's like this spiritual body of Akira who comes in, and is he the one that causes the explosion again, or was it Tetsuo?
He causes this explosion, except the first explosion at the beginning of the movie is sort of this black circle that sort of expands out. But this time, it's white. And then he's trying to do everything, sort of starting to absorb everything, including Tetsuo in his giant globular form, Kanda.
And Kaori, who actually gets crushed inside of the glob.
Yeah, because he was just reaching out for help. And then the three children, should we go in? Should we not? I don't know.
And they were able
He's not going to come back. Canada's not going to come back. And it's like, but then the three kids decide, if we go in there together, I think the three of us will be able to bring back Canada, because he just happens to be there trying to help his friend.
And before that, before everyone got sucked up, they were able to teleport Key and the Colonel out to a safe distance. But Canada was in the globby blob of Tetsuo. And so he got sucked into the white sphere thing. it's almost like another dimension inside of there.
I think that's actually what they're implying. I've looked at some other supposed explanations where like they go in this other dimension and we see some of Tetsuo's memories and how his happiness is destroyed from his relationship from Canada and sort of on his bike. And then it looks like we see some of what Akira's memories were like too. How he was just this kid who got almost too powerful for his own good. Then what he's trying to do is create sort of this another dimension or new universe that he can take Tetsuo where his power will be okay.
Yeah, because before the scientist dies in his lab when it gets crushed, he mentions something about how he's this is like the creation of the universe. So it's like another universe is being created. And so then the three ghost kids go in and teleport Canada out, but they have to stay in there in order to help contain it or something. That's like a lot of that stuff isn't really explained. It's just kind of like your own interpretation of what actually is happening. And it kind of expands out and destroys a lot of the city again.
Turns black.
And then
like the original explosion.
And then it
implodes
and goes back into it, like just this tiny little white dot that just kind of floats down, and Canada like
tries to put it in his hands, and
then it kind of disappears. And so I don't know if like it's kind of like expanded out and then collapsed in on itself into a new dimension or something. And that's basically towards the end of the movie. And then before the credits run, you just hear Tetsuo's voice just go, "I am Tetsuo." Like he's out there somewhere in some weird astral form.
Yeah, and when Canada's kind of floating around in the explosion, there's like sort of just debris everywhere. He's kind of standing on things over there. It almost reminds you a little bit of sort of the final big explosion sequence with the portal and Spider-Man into the Spider-Verse. So even today, the influence of this movie is everywhere. Once you see it, you can't unsee it, sort of thing.
Yeah, so that's the movie in a nutshell.
We've only scratched the surface. As for a 2-hour movie, this is very plot dense, and I think a lot of that is because it's a very densely plotted manga. Because, the manga is like 2,000 some pages with these 6 sort of giant volumes. But for such a long work, it is also extremely readable.
Yeah. And
it goes by faster because a lot of it is kind of just action and less dialogue. So now I'm going to take time to talk about sort of the big departures and how the manga ends versus how the movie ends. Just by the broad strokes, but then, just because it's a 2-hour movie versus a manga that cuts out metric tons. So while the movie only has 2 sort of big Akira explosions, the manga has 3 occurring at the middle, I believe at the end of volume 3, if I remember correctly. Because volume 1, 2, and 3 are the lead up to try and find, okay, we got Akira, who is this kid? Because when we find Akira in the manga, he's actually still alive, and he's just sort of just like a silent kid. He's like, oh, you Akira? It's like, okay, So when they go through this big sequence of trying to find them, trying to get to Akira, the thing opens up, and Akira's alive, and he's just sort of just a regular kid being silent. So then, into volume 3, what happens is sort of someone tries to shoot Tetsuo, they accidentally like graze Akira, and boom, that's when we have another giant explosion like at the beginning. So then the entire second half of the manga is sort of realizing, all right, so now there's like these new, the city is divided into factions and all aid has been cut off in these survivors. So there's kind of like these mutants and people who call themselves the Great Tokyo Empire with sort of Akira as their god king. And then sort of right next to them is sort of the speaker for Akira is Tetsuo with all their power. Then the other side is kind of what's left over the resistance with Lady Miyoko, who's kind of that old lady selling pamphlets you see briefly in the film. You find out she was like, you look at her wrist and it's like number 8 or something. So she was one of the older members of the program. So then there's this entire sort of resistance battle to get to Akira, to get to Tetsuo. But then it still kind of ends in the same way with Tetsuo going all giant blobby baby, going to another dimension. And at the very end, you see kind of Tetsuo, you see Kaneda, Kei, and the rest of his biker gang. All right, we are now the new Tokyo Empire. We declare ourselves like a solemn city-state. We're not going to take any aid from like the U.S. or anyone else in the crumbles of what's left of Neo Tokyo.
Huh. I'll look forward to reading all that.
It's a lot. but it's extremely well made. And I, if you can find a copy without sort of spending too much money, or if you really want to go for like sort of the 30th anniversary, those kind of the box set where they have where it has everything. So then it has all kind of like 6 volumes hardbound and an extra book called the Akira Club, which explains a lot of sort of the, all right, so this is what it was like. This is, a lot of it was serialized and was called like, I think Young Animal Magazine was what it was called. So that includes a lot of extra sort of complimentary information. So this is what this was then. So there's just a lot. This whole thing is just a lot. And there's also sort of kind of 2 works that kind of come before it. Because, you know, sometimes authors work with sort of the same themes over and over again. Like I know Stephen King would kind of have sort of work with the same ideas. Like he's got Psychic Kids first in Carrie, then they appear again in like
Firestarter
and other things. So then there's 2 works that kind of come before this as sort of focus a little bit of the same things, but not quite in the same amount of depth. First, there is this 45-page like short story called Fireball, which has a little bit of the same basic of Psychic Kid, and at the very end, a kid gets vivisected. And then there's Domu, which has some of the more Psychic Kids. That's just more of like an apartment block. And then, of course, Akira, which is this entire city. It's pretty, if you can, Fireball and Domu are hard to find. Akira is a lot easier to find, so you can probably just read Akira. It just stands on its own, and it's a complete work. But further, with some Googling on the internet, I also discovered something else that's much weirder. I discovered Bart Kira.
I did read like the first few pages of this, so
so it looks like Bart Kira was this internet project where they sort of recreated sort of the shot for shot or page per page remake of all of the Akira manga, except with Simpsons characters. And I believe like so I don't know, like Kaneda is Bart and Tetsuo is Milhouse.
See, that's what bothers me is they do that whole I'm going to play off of the title with Bart Simpson's name with Bart Kira, but then Bart is actually the other character.
And I think Akira is actually played by Ralph Wiggum, which just kind of makes it much funnier.
Oh. I'm going to have to finish reading that.
They go through the entire,
interesting.
They go through the entire 6-volume page by page. You can read it for free online. So it's just kind of fascinating, bizarre internet thing, but it's kind of unique because how they would do it is that artists would give out like a couple pages here and there. Because I know that's sort of done kind of same kind of jam projects. Like I believe another one was like Star Wars Uncut, where all these filmmakers would sort of, amateur filmmakers would come together and they'd film like a few like shots or even like a few, like maybe a scene from Star Wars.
And then throw them together.
Throw them all together. Some animation jams have done that where they take an animated short and remake it. Like there was one called Scroob Jam, which is where they take like a brief episode of Scooby-Doo, but then each animator throws it off in like their own different, unique, and weird style. So yeah, that's Bart Kira, and that's its whole own thing. But yeah, so another piece of info about this movie is that there were 50 colors specifically made for this movie because a lot of it takes place at night, and they needed some darker colors to really make it pop.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff like that about this movie where, you know, like I said, that you've got, you know, first anime to use like full motion, or one of the first to use full motion of all the body movement, the first anime to use pre-scored dialogue. So like it really set new bounds for anime specifically. And like I said, it's an important piece because I really do think that this was one thing that really got anime noticed in America in the early 90s. And that's when a boom kind of came.
And it's definitely kind of what helped kick off the boom that led to the anime sort of explosion and expansion, which we have with today. So with all the crappy anime and terrible things that are out, you can thank Akira, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, you know, it's like any other medium, you know. There's good, there's bad.
There's good stuff out there, and just, you know, gotta wait.
There's the Bebops and the Cowboys and
Yes.
My Hero Academia or whatever, and all these other things that my friends talk about that I've never seen.
Have you not seen Cowboy Bebop?
I have not seen Cowboy Bebop, but I do know they have a corgi, so I'm gonna have to watch it if only for the corgi.
I think I have the entire series, so I will let you borrow that.
Okay, might have to get into that sometime.
But the movie itself, is okay. Do you recommend this movie?
I think everyone, if you're a fan of anime or just a fan of animation in general, everyone should see it at least once.
Which is a silly question because we chose to talk about this
Yes.
movie. So, yeah, and I also agree. Having never seen this before, I was kind of blown away by the animation, considering it was made in the late 80s. And I thought that, like I said, the character development was really good, and you understood why the characters made the choices they did. And like I said, Tetsuo, and why he used the powers the way he did, because they really developed who he was and why he was the way he was. So there is some stuff that's left up to your interpretation, but it's the right stuff, I think.
Mm-hmm.
They left the right mysteries and answered the right questions. So I would highly recommend this movie to any fan of animation, especially. It's a very important film.
So another thing I think that's worth discussing is sort of the two types of writers that a lot of times can come up as sort of a pantser versus a plotter. So a pantser is kind of someone who they tend to fly by the seat of their pants, and they have much better characters, even if their plots can seem kind of shaggy overall. So a good example, especially if you've read the books, like George R.R. Martin, he is a certifiable pantser. He loves getting into details, but also his characters are extremely well realized. Stephen King can fall into this category too, especially with a lot of his longer works, like if you're reading It. It's huge. Some of the scenes are unnecessary, but it's kind of goes, he takes a B-movie plot, but then goes at it in sort of a way like War and Peace, in the sense that it's
I
just,
have read
characters
it 3 times, and you feel like you know those characters inside and out by the end of that book.
Oh, absolutely. It's some of the best, extremely well realized character in all of horror literature for sure.
And just in literature in general.
So then there's sort of plotters who are very kind of, they're all about the plot. Their plots are very streamlined. Everything's goes one thing leads to another, leads to another, leads to another, but their characters can't necessarily be as strong. So I'm not kind of sure where this movie falls. This movie, just because a lot happens to it, it almost feels more on the plotter, but I'm not sure if the manga would be more of a pantser just because there's just so much of it, but it all still seems very tight.
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting. I'd figure maybe somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, because both, even in the movie, which, there is a lot of stuff cut out, it feels like the author did kind of put a lot of thought into actually both, because like I said, he had to create the ending and go from there. So like he was paying a lot of attention to the plot, but you can also tell that he has developed these characters. So he really is in between, and it's really kind of nice to see, because it's kind of the best of both worlds with this. Mm-hmm. So that is Akira.
It's certainly something. Then watch it, love it.
Comment below. Tell us what you think.
Yeah.
Wait. As the kids say, smash that like button.
Smash that subscribe button. Hit the bell icon.
Do all of that.
Kids. Follow us on Twitter.
I am at AwesomeKM.
And I'm at Noah_Saturn.
You can find us on Instagram at We Don't Know What to Watch. And eventually we'll probably do another one of these giant size specials. And when we find a movie that kind of...
we both want to talk about a lot.
Yeah. So until next time, we'll get back to our regularly scheduled randomness.
Until then, Tetsuo!
I am Tetsuo.